Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about phase one of the career design process, which is reflection. Why do we start with reflection? So as I kind of alluded to before, the main reason that we start with reflection is threefold. Number one, we want to remind ourselves of what actually matters most as we're pursuing a career change. It's very easy to get distracted by a shiny job description or something else and find ourselves in just as unfulfilling of a place later as where we're trying to escape from right now. So by investing up front in this reflection piece, we are ultimately reducing our risk of taking a misstep along the way. The second thing that the reflection process helps us do is create a compass of sorts that helps us more effectively navigate your career journey. And so by having this compass up front, we can better say no to opportunities that don't actually make sense and yes to those opportunities that will take us somewhere worthwhile. So there are a couple of things that we like to talk about in the reflection phase that I want to walk you through during this video. The three things are values, strengths, and interests, and then how they all wrap up into what we call the personal mission statement. So let's start with values. All of us have values, right? And we like to talk about the core values. And core values are kind of the operating system that we each individually have that helps us navigate through life. It helps us make decisions about who we want to be, what we want to do, who we spend time with, things of that nature. It is really important as you start your career search process to think about what are my top values. Maybe this is an exercise you've done before, but for a lot of folks, it's not. This is something that we don't consciously think about. So the first thing that I'd like you to do in this values discovery process is literally write down what you believe to be your top 5 values. And from there, I want you to think about how do you actually practice these values? What do you do in your life right now to pay homage to these values, to actually hold them close and practice them? And I also want you to think about in what ways has your career thus far aligned or not aligned with those values. So spend some time thinking about that. The second piece in the reflection phase is strengths. So there is an entire field of study around strengths, strength psychology, and really the core tenet of this field is that we are much more effective when we focus on leveraging our strengths as opposed to bolstering our weaknesses. And we at Mission Collaborative are also big believers in this idea that building a career that aligns with your strengths is ultimately going to make you much more effective than challenging yourself to go into a role where you're perhaps not so strong and then trying to catch up and become more effective. So for the strengths section of the reflection process, I would encourage you to think about what are my top strengths. Now, strengths are kind of like your de facto ways of tackling problems in the world. These are how you approach a situation, how you deal with stuff. So they're not hard skills, they're more like the way that you just naturally tend to a problem. So using myself as an example, I am high in what's called strategy. So when I look at a problem, I immediately think to myself, what are all the different approaches and angles that I could take to try to solve this problem? I'm very strategic when I approach problem solving. A great way to better understand your own strengths is this tool you've maybe heard of called StrengthsFinder 2.0 by a company called Gallup. We use them in our program. We find it to be pretty comprehensive and valuable. So regardless, I would encourage you to think about what are your top 5 strengths. Once you've done that, the next question that I'd encourage you to think about is how do you use these strengths in your current role? And if you're like me, when I first did this exercise, what I realized is that I was hardly using my best strengths at all in my current role, and perhaps that had quite a bit to do with why I was so unhappy in it. So think about that question. How do you use your strengths in your current role? The third thing that's part of the reflection process is what I'm calling interests. So interests are kind of like the fields or topics that you find compelling, the things that you spend a lot of time thinking about or working on or just engaging with. So a good question to answer for yourself might be, what are some of the causes or communities that I feel deeply drawn to support? right? And another question you can ask yourself to help identify those interests would be, what could I spend hours working on without getting bored? And there's an important distinction here. If you're somebody who says interests, well, I love movies, I watch a ton of movies, that's not really quite as useful as that second question I asked, which is, what could I spend a lot of time working on? So don't so much think about what you're interested in consuming, think instead about what am I interested in creating, in producing. That'll actually get you much further. A way to help you with all three of these pieces is an exercise that we call Leave Your Legacy. So this is something that you can do right now at home, but essentially it is a reflection exercise where you think about what sort of legacy would I want to leave behind. So what you can do is you can literally grab a sheet of journal paper and spend about 10 minutes just answering this question to yourself. What sort of legacy do I want to have, and what sort of impact do I want to leave behind? If you are thoughtful about this exercise and you make time to do it, it's going to help you answer a lot of these questions, because that's a pretty big prompt, right? So again, what kind of legacy do I want to leave, and what sort of impact do I want to create with my life? And I'd also encourage you to think big. So a lot of people will say something like, well, I want to raise a great family and have my kids live long and prosper. That's great, that's important, that can be part of your legacy, but I want you to think big here, right? You have an entire lifetime ahead of you. What else could you accomplish? What other contribution could you make? What other impact do you want to have with your life and your legacy? So go ahead and do that as an exercise in your free time. The last thing that I want to talk about in the reflection phase is this idea of creating a personal mission statement. We think of the personal mission statement as a way of kind of wrapping up your values, strengths, and interests into one concrete statement that acts as a compass for you. So your mission statement is basically a way of summarizing the entire reflection phase. And it is something that you can bring with you both personally to give you a sense of strength and direction, but also something you can use to communicate externally with the world. It's actually really effective to sit down with somebody and say, hey, this is my mission. This is what drives me. This is what motivates me. This is what I care about. And these are the strengths that I bring to the table. So we're not going to have time in this video to dig into building a personal mission statement, but it is something that we put a lot of time and energy on during the Career Pivot Fellowship program, which is something that we, of course, encourage you to check out if you want to dig into this stuff deeper. So that's what I've got for you today on the reflection phase. Tune in for the next video, and we'll dive into definition. Thank you.